Have you ever wondered what it's like to go through life carrying a secret that isn't just a detail, but the essence of what I feel, what I desire, and who I truly am? Many men who are now 50, 60, or 70 know all too well the weight of living this way. Years and years maintaining an image, repeating pre-made phrases, accepting roles that society, family, and religion expected of me, while inside my chest, something screamed to be heard. It's like living two lives, the one everyone sees and the one only I know. And maintaining these two lives in balance is costly, because every rehearsed smile, every invented excuse, every forced silence steals a piece of my soul. It was like that for me. At 68, I seemed the picture of a respected, disciplined, and successful man. Retired from a large company, I had accumulated achievements that others admired and respected. To my nephews, I was a role model. To my neighbors, a role model. To my friends, I was the one who always had a witty retort and a trustworthy demeanor. But all I had to do was close the front door for the silence of the apartment to become a mirror. And in that invisible reflection, I saw not pride but a profound emptiness. It wasn't as a child that I hid what I felt. Children aren't clear about desire. They don't yet understand what it means for a heart to race in front of someone. But from my youth, when I realized my body and mind were heading down a path society didn't accept, I learned to keep quiet. This silence became routine, and the routine became a prison. I spent decades being recognized as the man who never needed to justify himself. He's like that because he loves his work, they said. He's serious, reserved, focused. No one questioned it, and I myself fed this narrative. At family gatherings, when asked why I never married, I had the answer ready, always accompanied by a wry smile. My great love was work. People laughed, the subject dropped, and life went on. But inside, something died too. The chance to speak the truth out loud. How many men, perhaps watching now, have experienced the same scene? How many have made excuses to avoid questions? How many have used work as a shield, seriousness as armor, loneliness as justification? How many still carry in their memory a name, a face, a memory they could never confess to anyone? If this has happened to you, leave a comment. True, this word is the guiding thread of this story, because the truth may be hidden, but it never disappears. In those youthful days, I believed I could mold myself into what was expected of me. I threw everything I had into my career. He spent entire nights at the office, accepted every responsibility, and traveled for months at a time without complaint. While colleagues talked about family plans, children, and romantic getaways, I talked about reports, goals, and projects. It was my way of numbing my heart, because it was in the quiet moments, when I was alone, that the ghost appeared. The face that returned to my memory, the name that echoed without permission, the desire I never had the courage to acknowledge. In the eyes of others, I was a complete man. But deep inside, I felt constantly incomplete. My body began to take its toll. Anxiety attacks, sleepless nights, unexplained pain. The doctors said everything was fine, that it was just stress. I knew otherwise. My body spoke what my mouth refused to say. My body carried every swallowed word, every repressed gesture, every silenced desire. And my heart, though seemingly hardened, beat out of sync with the lie. And there was always a name stuck in my chest. Michael, the friend from my youth, the presence that illuminated, that made every conversation seem eternal, that provoked a different smile, a different warmth. I never had the courage to say out loud what I felt, but inside it was impossible to deny it. And even after decades, that name continued to exist like an open scar. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many achievements I accumulated, that memory still lived on. The night I found an old diary, it all came rushing back. The yellowed paper held scribbles, unfinished sentences, unspoken confessions, and between the shaky lines, there it was, Michael. It was as if time had folded. My heart raced, my body trembled, my eyes filled with tears. Decades of silence were compressed into each letter. It was as if the young man I once was still there, begging to be heard. And this is where I want you to reflect with me. How many times have you kept quiet to avoid being judged? How many times have you smiled at family dinners just to avoid questions? How many times have you responded with ready-made phrases when inside all you wanted to do was shout the truth? If this has happened to you, write the word in the comments, courage, because courage was what I lacked in my youth, and perhaps it is what many men lack even today. At 68, sitting in front of the forgotten diary, I realized something painful. It wasn't just society that prevented me from living. I stopped myself. Silence hadn't just protected my image, it had devoured my life. And now, near the end of the line, the question remained, is there still time? This question isn't simple. It's not just about confessing a secret. It's about facing myself, my family, my religion, and society. It's about risking losing everything to, perhaps for the first time, gain myself. And it is precisely here that my story begins to unfold. Because the reunion with the truth, even belatedly, has the power to change everything. I didn't know it, but that forgotten diary would be the key to events I never could have imagined. The morning after the night I found the diary, I woke with my mind racing. The notebook was still on the table, open to the page where Michael's name appeared repeatedly. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the yellowed paper, and I had the feeling those old words were watching me, demanding an answer. My heart beat faster, just remembering the scribbled sentences, the interrupted confessions, the emotions I had buried. It was as if my youth had suddenly resurfaced, demanding a reckoning. Sitting in front of the diary, I began to leaf through it more carefully. Each entry seemed to carry a piece of the young man I once was, a young man full of dreams, yet paralyzed by fear. There were simple descriptions of college, of classes, of exams, of meeting up with friends. But always, one way or another, Michael appeared between the lines. A sentence about a group project ended with his name. A note about a trivial conversation was punctuated by words charged with emotion. On every page it was clear that I had never been able to shake that presence. As I relived those memories, a mixture of pain and tenderness washed over me. Michael wasn't just a friend. He was the memory of everything that could have been and wasn't. His smiling face, his discreet gestures, his voice that sounded like music in the college hallways. I remembered every detail as if decades hadn't passed, the smell of the library, the conversations on cold nights, the quick glances that to anyone else meant nothing, but to me were an entire world. How many of you know what it's like to carry a name in your heart for so long? How many have felt that a memory is so vivid that it seems more real than the present? If you've ever experienced something like this, please comment, memory, because remembering is not just reliving, it is recognizing that it never ceased to exist. As I held the diary, I realized I'd spent my life building walls. Every choice, every automatic response, every rehearsed smile served to protect my image, but also to distance me from myself. Work, which had always been a source of pride for others, was a hiding place for me. The constant traveling, the awards received, the goals achieved, none of it filled the void growing in my chest. My body had been taking its toll for years, insomnia, palpitations, anxiety attacks. The price of silence accumulated like a debt. That morning, for the first time in a long time, I asked myself, is there still time to reverse this? I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Grey hair, deep wrinkles, tired eyes. I seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of sacrifices. But there was also a different spark in my gaze. The journal had awakened something I'd thought dead. The hours passed slowly. I tried to follow my routine. I made coffee, read the newspaper headlines, tidied the house. But everything seemed mechanical, meaningless. My mind kept returning to the yellowed pages, the name written over and over, the memories of my youth. I felt torn between the pain of what I'd lost and the hope of still recovering a part of myself. That night I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, memories came flooding back. The first day of college, when I met Michael, the hours in the library, studying side by side, the laughter during walks, the accidental touch of hands that made my heart race. I relived every moment as if it were now, and the question lingered. Why had I never had the courage to speak up? Perhaps you've asked yourself this question too. How many opportunities have you missed out on fear? How many silences have you endured, believing it was safer to remain silent than to take risks? If you've experienced this, write it down. Fear in the comments. Because fear is often the greatest enemy of truth. I knew I couldn't keep pretending nothing had happened. The diary was there, proof that I hadn't lived the life I wanted. And as I flipped through those pages, I realized it wasn't just a memory. It was a summons. Something inside me told me there was still a chance to change. Not to recover the past, that's impossible, but to stop repeating the same mistake in the present. In the days that followed, I began to see the world through different eyes. The city streets seemed different, as if every corner held the possibility of a reunion. My heart, asleep for so long, beat faster. But along with hope came anxiety. Because reliving memories wasn't just remembering, it was opening old wounds that never healed. One afternoon, walking downtown, I felt something strange. Among the bustling crowd, I swore I saw a familiar face. My heart raced, my hands sweated, my eyes searched desperately. But it was an illusion. My brain, lulled by memories, was playing cruel tricks on me. I returned home emptier than before, with the feeling that something was about to happen. And indeed it was. Because the past, no matter how much we try to bury it, always finds a way to return. I didn't know it yet, but the reunion that would change my life was already lurking. I spent days with this feeling of living between two worlds. The present, silent and predictable, and the past, now more vivid than ever. The diary sat on the table as a constant reminder, and every time I glanced at those pages, it was like a shock. Sometimes I considered putting it away in a drawer and forgetting about it, but something stronger held me back. It was as if those words from decades ago demanded a reckoning, an inevitable encounter with the truth. One random night, sleepless, I picked up the diary again. I read it calmly, line by line, as if trying to recover not only memories but also my youth. And amidst the scattered sentences, I found something that felt like a secret code. A vague description of a cafe where I used to meet with Michael and his colleagues, an address scrawled on the side, barely visible. My heart raced. Did the cafe still exist? And if it did, had Michael ever returned there? The next morning I decided to check it out. I walked downtown as if reliving an old ritual. The cafe, to my surprise, was still there. Renovated, more modern, but with the same name on the facade. Upon entering, a mixture of nostalgia and melancholy washed over me. The walls were no longer the same, but the ambiance held a familiarity that almost made me stumble. I sat by the window and ordered a simple coffee. As I waited, my mind wandered back to my student days. I remembered an afternoon when Michael and I were right there, sitting side by side, laughing at silly things and sharing a piece of cheap cake. I remember the way he gestured, the way he smiled with his eyes, how he always seemed at ease wherever he was. And I remember most of all myself, motionless, hoping that moment would never end, but lacking the courage to turn it into something more. Have you, who are listening to me now, ever found yourself in a place that brought back all the memories of a lifetime? Have you ever felt your heart race just by being in a place that holds your story? If so, write memory in the comments. Because memory is not just a memory. It is a silent cry asking to be heard. As I absent-mindedly stirred my cup, I realized I wasn't alone in the cafe. Several people came and went, but one face in particular caught my attention. A grey-haired man with a calm expression talking to the waiter near the counter. For a moment, I thought it was Michael. My entire body reacted as if shocked. My hands trembled, the coffee nearly spilled from the cup. But when the man turned around completely, I realized it was just a stranger. Relief and frustration came together, leaving me stunned. At that moment, I understood I couldn't go on like this. The past wouldn't go away. The name written in the diary, the memories that returned in detail, the interrupted dreams, everything demanded an answer. And the question that wouldn't leave my mind was, did Michael still remember me? Did he somewhere harbor the same memories, the same doubts, the same unfulfilled desires? Upon returning home, I opened a drawer I'd been avoiding for years. Inside were old letters, photographs, small objects stored for no apparent reason. Among them, a black and white class photo from college. There we were, side by side, smiling. unaware that that image would freeze a lifetime of silence. I ran my finger over Michael's face in the photo and felt a shiver run through me. That night was different. I didn't try to fight the memories. I let them come one after another, like waves I couldn't control. I remembered the library, the walks at dusk, the calm voice that always seemed to find the right words. I also remembered the last day we saw each other, how we said goodbye without the courage to say what really mattered. And it was in this whirlwind that I realized the reunion wouldn't just be a possibility, but a necessity. Life was pushing me toward it, and I couldn't resist any longer. I didn't yet know how or when, but I knew I would need to look Michael in the eye again. Aviso. How many of you have felt this urgency? This feeling that time may have passed, but there's still something unfinished waiting to be resolved. If this has happened to you, write it down. Reunion in the comments. Because the reunion isn't just with the other person. It's with the part of us that was lost in the past. In that moment, with the diary open in one hand and the photograph in the other, I realized I was at my limit. The silence I'd carried for decades was beginning to crack. And once the silence cracks, there's no going back. The days that followed were a silent torment. The diary remained on the living room table, open to yellowed pages that seemed to bleed with memories. I tried to live my usual routine, waking up early, drinking black coffee without sugar, leafing through the newspaper like someone who still cared about what was happening in the world. But none of it held any weight. My gaze always returned to those words scribbled decades ago, to that name repeated in uncertain strokes. Michael. It was as if each letter had a life of its own, haunting me around the apartment. I wondered, how many times had I been one step away from telling the truth? How many times had desire burned in my throat, and I chosen to swallow hard, smile, joke? Now, at almost 70, I realized that time had healed nothing. It had merely masked the wound with layers of silence. One grey afternoon, I decided to visit the old college. It wasn't a planned visit. I simply left home, took the subway, and let my feet guide me. The building had been renovated, but some of the structure remained. The hallways smelled of new paint, but all I had to do was close my eyes and hear the echo of young voices, the laughter lost among the stacks of books. I walked slowly across the courtyard. There, beneath a tree, Michael would often sit with his classmates laughing at some lame joke. The scene was no longer before me, but a quick effort of memory was enough to relive every detail. The way he tilted his head as he listened, the way he bit his lower lip when he thought. I remained motionless for a few minutes, feeling my heart beat faster, as if I were back in my 20s. Have you, who are listening to me, ever returned to a place from your past and felt like time never erased anything? Have you ever felt that places hold memories like invisible scars? If you have experienced this, write memory in the comments, because remembering is sometimes more painful than forgetting. In the library, the silence seemed to mock me. I ran my fingers through the shelves as if still searching for books I'd never read. I remembered the accidental touch on Michael's arm, how my entire body ignited in seconds, how I'd had to hold my breath to keep from trembling. I remembered the rush to hide it, the shame of feeling what couldn't be said. Decades later, that moment still burned. On my way out, I passed the graduation tableau. I recognized myself, young, serious, trying to look grown up. Beside me, Michael's wide smile lit up the photograph. I stopped, took a deep breath, and for the first time in decades, quietly blurted out, "I loved you." The sound of the words echoed through the empty hallway, and in that instant, I felt a devastating mix of relief and pain. For days, that scene wouldn't leave my mind. I returned home and stared at the diary on the table like a judge. I lay down at night and imagined a different life, trips, dinners, conversations interrupted by caresses. I fantasized about a youth that never happened, reinventing the past as if I could make up for lost time. But when I woke, the weight of reality always returned. The apartment was empty. Life continued silently. The loneliness once tolerable is now unbearable. The silence of the walls seems to scream. I began to wonder if there was still a chance, if there was still time. My body no longer has the same strength, but my heart still beats. I know that if I remain silent, I will die swallowing my own truth. It was in this state of fragility that fate decided to intervene. One afternoon, wandering aimlessly through the streets of downtown, I stopped in front of a small bookstore. The window displayed hardcover books, old editions that seemed to have survived generations. I entered, more for distraction than out of interest. I walked slowly through the narrow aisles, breathing in the scent of old paper mixed with coffee coming from the counter at the back. And then I heard a laugh. A familiar laugh, one that pierced the years like lightning. My entire body shivered. I turned slowly, in disbelief. There, clutching a book in both hands, grey hair, glasses sliding down his nose, was Michael. My heart raced as if it wanted to burst from my chest. The world around me disappeared. I could have turned around, left silently, pretended I hadn't seen him, but my feet remained glued to the ground. Time stood still. Michael hadn't noticed me yet. I took in every detail. The lines on his face, the calm way he flipped through the pages, the serenity in his gaze. The same man, but now imbued with maturity. When he finally looked up, he saw me. There was a second of absolute silence, and then a smile. Not just any smile, but that youthful smile I knew well, the smile I'd kept hidden in my heart for a lifetime. "Daniel," he said, his voice deep, firmer, but still full of that familiarity. I tried to answer, but my throat gave out. I just nodded, my eyes welling up. Time collapsed around us. There were no more storefronts, no more customers, just two men facing an entire life unlived. Michael stepped forward and held out his hand. I took it firmly, like someone grasping for a second chance that seemed impossible. Have you ever experienced a reunion like this? So unexpected that it made your heart race as if you'd gone back decades? If so, write the words in the comments, "Destination." Because sometimes that's exactly what it is. Fate patiently waits for the right time to bring two people face to face again. I left the bookstore as if awakening from a trance. I walked the streets without realizing where I was going, my heart still racing, my hands trembling. The unexpected reunion with Michael had turned everything upside down. Decades of silence came flooding back in a matter of seconds. It was as if all the self-control that had sustained my entire life had cracked at the mere sight of a simple smile. That night I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt smaller, the walls more suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, the way he adjusted his glasses, the deep tone of his voice when he said my name. It was the same feeling I'd had in my youth, only now multiplied by the weight of lost time. My cell phone, which rarely rang, vibrated on the table. A short message. "It was good to see you. Can we meet up to talk calmly?" I stared at those words like someone holding lit dynamite. I didn't respond right away. I paced the room, breathing deeply, as if a simple answer could change my entire life. After a few minutes I typed, "Yes. When and where?" 2 days later, we met at a low-key cafe far from the city center. Michael was already seated when I arrived. The table was small, the room lit by yellow light, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the soft sound of jazz playing in the background. I stood in front of him for a few seconds before sitting down, as if needing to convince myself this was real. "I almost couldn't believe it when I saw you," he said, giving me a calm smile. "Me too," I replied, my voice breaking. "I thought, never again." There was a pause. We stared at each other for a long time as if speaking without words. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy, full of memories. Michael took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down on the table. "Life goes by so fast, doesn't it?" he murmured. "It seems like only yesterday we were meeting in the library in the courtyard without ever saying what we really wanted to say." I took a deep breath. And yet, almost 50 years have passed. Have you, who are listening to me now, ever met someone who touched your life so intensely that time seemed to stand still? If you've experienced this, write the word in the comments .reunion. Because meeting again isn't just about seeing someone else again. It's about seeing who you were and who you could still be. The conversation proceeded cautiously, like treading on glass floors. We talked about safe things, work, family, health. Michael explained that he had 2 adult children, that he had lost his wife a few years earlier, and that he had learned to live alone. I listened silently, trying to absorb every detail. My heart pounded with each word, but I didn't dare ask what I really wanted to know. Have you ever felt for me the way I've always felt for you? At one point, Michael stopped talking and just stared at me. His eyes held the same intensity as they had in youth, but now they held maturity, pain, and experience. You look tired, he said gently. I'm not talking about your body. I'm talking about your eyes. I looked away, fidgeting with my napkin as if seeking refuge. It's the weight of time, Michael. It takes its toll. Or is it the weight of silence? He replied firmly. The sentence fell like a knife to my chest. I tried to smile, tried to change the subject, but I couldn't. The silence that followed was more revealing than any answer. Michael noticed, but didn't press the point. He just leaned back in his chair and said, I also carry silences, but I've learned that they don't disappear, they only get heavier. That phrase echoed in my mind for days. I'd come home and repeat to myself, they don't disappear, they just get heavier. I felt like every hour of my life had been a practice run for hiding, and now I was too tired to keep acting. Meetings became more frequent. First a quick lunch, then a walk around the square, then a visit to an exhibition downtown. Each time we were together, the world seemed lighter. But at the same time, the fear grew. The fear of being seen, the fear of someone suspecting, the fear of finally admitting what I'd always felt. One afternoon we sat on a park bench. The sun was setting, tinting the sky orange. Children ran nearby, couples walked hand in hand. I watched it all with a mixture of envy and hope. Have you ever thought about what it would have been like if we had had the courage back then? I asked almost in a whisper. It took Michael a few seconds to respond. Every day. My heart raced. I quickly turned my face away, staring at the horizon to keep from bursting into tears. The silence that followed said more than any confession. There, side by side, we both knew we carried the same wound. Have you, who are listening to me now, ever found yourself thinking about what things would have been like if you had made a different choice in the past? If this question has ever haunted you, write the word in the comments with, because sometimes it's that if that shapes our entire life. For the next few nights I could barely sleep. I relived every detail, the touch of hands almost touching, the lingering glances, the phrase, every day. I wondered if there was still time, if life could finally allow us to experience what had always been denied. But along with hope came guilt. Guilt for having waited so long, guilt for not knowing how to deal with society, with family, with the weight of the consequences. The meetings continued, and the tension mounted. At a cafe, Michael let slip a phrase laden with ambiguity. You know, I always thought life was unfair to us. I widened my eyes. With us? He nodded. Yes, because we didn't have the courage to live what we wanted. The words hung in the air like gunpowder ready to explode. I wanted to respond, but my mouth went dry. I just lowered my eyes and let the silence speak for me. That night, lying in bed, I realized there was no going back. The past had returned, but not as a memory, as a presence. Michael wasn't just a ghost from my youth. He was there again, rekindling everything I'd spent my life trying to bury. How many of you have felt this? Your heart asking for courage while your mind freezes with fear? If you've experienced this conflict, write the word in the comments. Courage. Because courage is the only bridge between the life we have and the life we could have. I knew I was at my limit. The reunion had opened an old wound, but it had also rekindled a flame. Now, either I faced the truth, or I would die in the silence that consumed me. And it was at this point that fate took a step further. The next morning I woke feeling as if my body had been in a battle all night. The dark circles under my eyes were heavy, my muscles were tense, and my mind was still buzzing with Michael's words. We didn't have the courage to live what we wanted. That lingered like a sentence. I got up slowly, showered in silence, and looked in the mirror. My reflection revealed a tired man, but also someone who seemed about to cross a line. In my volunteer work at a neighborhood association, no one suspects what's going on inside me. My colleagues see me as a respectable, upstanding, and discreet man. I offer polite smiles and help with tasks, but inside, I feel like I'm about to explode. It's as if I'm carrying dynamite in my chest. Every sentence Michael utters, every gesture, every look is shattering the silence I've maintained for decades. Late that afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was Michael. "I need to talk to you," he said on the other end of the line with an urgency that made my heart race. "Did something happen?" I asked. "I just need to see you. Today." We met at the same discreet cafe. I arrived first, and while I waited, I felt my entire body vibrate as if I were a teenager again. When he walked in, one look was enough to tell something had changed. There was a seriousness in his expression, almost a weight. "I can't keep pretending," Michael said as soon as we sat down. I swallowed hard. "Pretending what?" "Pretending these encounters are just memories, that we're just reminiscing about our youth. That's not it. You know it. I know it." The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to fill the entire room. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. The fear was there, as strong as the urge to cross that line. "Michael," I began, but my voice failed. "I've lost a lot in life," he continued. "I've lost my wife, I've lost friends, I've lost time, but I don't want to miss out on another chance to experience what was left behind. Life won't give us another break. It's now or never." Have you, whoever is listening, ever faced this dilemma? Have you ever found yourself faced with a choice that seemed to divide your life in two directions? Continue to live a comfortable lie or risk everything for the truth? If so, write the word in the comments. True, because it is at this point that life forces us to choose. I looked down. My hands trembled on the table. The waiter brought the coffee and neither of us touched the cup. I took a deep breath, looked up, and with difficulty said, "I don't want to pretend anymore either, but I'm scared." Michael nodded. "I have it too, but living in fear has cost us too much." In that moment, something changed. There was no kiss, no scandalous gesture, just the certainty that finally we had both said out loud what had been hidden for almost 50 years. In the days that followed, our encounters grew more intense. We walked quiet streets, chatted on park benches, and exchanged confidences in the silence of the night. But along with the joy came the ghosts. I felt like life was about to take its toll. A neighbor's curious glance, an acquaintance's snide comment. Every detail felt like a threat. One night, after a simple dinner, Michael stopped in front of his car and said, "How long are we going to live like this, hiding in secluded cafes, averting glances? I don't have time to wait anymore." I felt my body freeze. "Are you saying that?" "I'm saying I want to live. With you. Without fear." The words fell like an earthquake. I couldn't respond immediately. My mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. Family, reputation, neighbors, judgments. But at the same time, inside me, a flame was burning, asking for only one thing: courage. Have you ever felt this way? Torn between the safety of lies and the risk of truth? If you've ever felt this way, write in the comments. Courage. Because courage is the only key capable of unlocking the doors of life. That night I returned home and stared at my old diary again. Michael's name, scrawled across the pages of his youth, seemed to scream from within. All those wasted years, I thought. But for the first time, I felt that perhaps there was still time, not to recapture youth, but to experience something real in old age. My heart was pounding. It was as if the reunion had planted a time bomb inside me. Each encounter was a countdown. I knew that at some point I would have to take the final step. The story had reached a point where there was no more room for excuses. I was facing the limit. Continuing to hide meant dying alive. Facing the truth meant risking everything. But after so many years, I wasn't sure I was willing to waste any more time. And that's exactly when the plot began to tilt toward the inevitable. The silence was too cracked to mend. Their next encounter wouldn't be just another memory. It would be a turning point. I spent the next few days as if walking a tightrope stretched across the void. Every step was measured, every word considered, every gesture charged with meaning. Reuniting with Michael was no longer just a pleasant memory. It was a fine line between a comfortable lie and the truth pulsing within me. While volunteering, I tried to smile, but my mind wandered. Walking the streets, I found myself observing couples, not enviously, but with the knowledge that I had never allowed myself to do so. The weight of absence was stronger because now, with Michael around, I knew what it could be like. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to take a walk aimlessly. The wind blew lightly, and the sun hid behind clouds that tinged the sky grey. We passed ancient streets, buildings that bore the marks of our youth, and reached the steps of the college where it all began. We stopped in silence. I ran my hand over the cool stone and felt as if decades of memories were coursing through me. Michael broke the silence. "You know, I never stopped remembering this place." I swallowed hard. Me either. And I always thought, what would have happened if we had had courage back then? The question fell like a blade. I froze. My heart raced, my hands sweated, but I couldn't answer. I just stared blankly ahead. Michael sighed deeply but didn't press further. Have you ever asked yourself this question? What would your life have been like if you had found the courage at the right time? If this question has ever haunted you, write the word in the comments. Destination. Because that's what we're talking about here, the destiny we create or let slip away. In the days that followed, our encounters became even more frequent. Discreet dinners, hidden coffees, aimless strolls. But each encounter seemed to increase the tension. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was desire. It was urgency. It was life screaming that there was no more time to wait. One of those nights the rain fell heavily. We took shelter under the awning of a closed store. The sound of water on the asphalt created a kind of music that isolated us from the rest of the world. Michael reached out and touched my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it set my entire body on fire. I closed my eyes for a moment, as if facing an abyss. I felt the urge to cross, but I held back. "How long are we going to live like this?" he asked, almost in a whisper. It took me a while to respond. "I don't know. I'm scared." "I have it too, but I'm tired of living in fear." His words echoed louder than the sound of the rain. I knew this conversation wasn't just about the two of us. It was about a lifetime of silence. The next day, when I woke up, I couldn't get out of bed right away. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the touch, the question, the fragile answer I'd given. I knew time was running out. Life wouldn't offer me another chance. How many of you have felt this way? Faced with a unique opportunity, but held back by the fear of facing the judgment of others. If you've experienced this, leave a comment below. Courage. Reuniting with Michael was opening old wounds and at the same time bringing new energy within me. But along with this energy also came a sense of danger. I noticed curious glances whenever we were together, a neighbor who greeted me too quickly, a colleague who asked pointed questions. Everything seemed like a clue that my secret was about to be discovered. One of those times, as we were leaving a restaurant, we ran into an old college friend. He smiled broadly and said, in an innocent but implicit tone, "Look at that, the inseparables again. Who would have thought, huh?" Michael laughed lightly, but I froze. I felt the ground give way beneath my feet. My colleague said goodbye and went on his way, but the phrase kept ringing in my head, "the inseparables again." It sounded like an accusation, a harbinger of what everyone was about to find out. As we left, as the ballroom doors closed behind us, the cold night wind blew against our faces. Michael walked beside me, serene, until he said, "You did what I always hoped you would do." I took a deep breath. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but today I truly existed. The walk back was silent, but within me there was a revolution. The fear was still there, yes, but now it was divided by something new, the feeling of freedom. In the days that followed, the repercussions of what happened spread. Some phone calls from family members were filled with questions, others filled with anger or disappointment. But there were also unexpected messages. "Thank you for what you said. I never had the courage. Your words made me think of everything I hid. I realized I hadn't just exposed my own life. I had also opened cracks in other lives. The truth hurts, but it also frees. And most importantly, with Michael by my side, I felt like I no longer needed to hide." We went out together, sometimes discreetly, sometimes not so much. I was still startled by curious looks, but all I had to do was remember the microphone, the room, the words that had escaped without return. I can't lie anymore. That sentence wasn't just a confession, it was a game changer. One afternoon, sitting in a simple bakery, Michael reached across the table and touched mine. It was a natural gesture, without fear, without haste. At any other time, I would have pulled my hand back. But in that moment, I let it stay. The waiter didn't even notice. The couple at the next table didn't react. The world didn't fall apart. And I understood that freedom, after all, isn't a spectacle. It's those small moments when the heart breathes without masks. News of my speech and my reunion with Michael spread faster than I imagined. The next day, the phone started ringing early. First came my closest relatives. My sister called, her voice tense, trying to understand what I meant by the microphone. She didn't accuse me, didn't judge me, but her question carried a mixture of surprise and concern. "Daniel, what did you mean by those words? They're talking about it everywhere." I took a deep breath. I still didn't have any easy answers. "I meant, I'm tired of pretending." On the other end of the line, silence. Then her voice became softer. "I knew there was something you were hiding. I just didn't know what." That sentence pierced me like a knife. It hurt and comforted me at the same time. It hurt because it showed me that the silence was never complete. There were always signs. It comforted me because, in a way, I was never completely alone in this realization. The calls continued. Some relatives reacted with irony, others with disappointment, and others simply with curiosity. A nephew texted me asking if everything I had insinuated was true. I didn't answer right away. My heart sank. The old fear was still there, clinging to my gut, as if it wouldn't let me move on. Meanwhile, Michael remained by my side, not just physically, but as a point of balance. It was he who said, "You don't need to explain anything to anyone. You only need to explain yourself." But I knew the world around me wouldn't let it slide. Neighbors began to look at me differently. At the cafe I frequented, I noticed whispers when I entered. In the group of former colleagues, messages began to circulate, some supportive, others mocking. The internet, even in that small circle, amplified everything. And it was in this turbulent setting that I began to understand the true weight of my choice. The microphone in the hall had been just the beginning. Now, every gesture, every word, every silence would be interpreted. How many of you have felt this weight? The weight of carrying a decision that changes everything and realizing the world isn't ready to accept it. If this has ever happened to you, write the word in the comments, courage. Because that was exactly what I needed at that moment. The nights were long again. I would lie down, close my eyes, and relive the scene in the ballroom. Michael's steady gaze urging me to continue, the reactions of my colleagues, the heavy silence, and the sentence that escaped like a scream, "I can't lie anymore." Those words echoed like a mantra, and at the same time like a nightmare. One day, while we were walking together, we passed an old acquaintance from college. He greeted us formally, but then immediately launched into a venomous question. "So is what they're saying true?" What? I froze. I didn't know what to say, but Michael stepped forward. "Truth needs no defense, it stands on its own." The man smiled wryly and walked away, and I stood there, torn between shame and pride. Shame for still feeling exposed, pride for seeing Michael firmly face what I still couldn't. The following days were marked by small battles. Some longtime friends simply disappeared. Others, unexpectedly, appeared with messages of support. One wrote, "Daniel, what you did gave me strength. I never had courage, but now I wonder if there's still time." This message resonated deeply with me. I realized that by exposing myself, I wasn't just risking my reputation, I was paving the way for others. And this brought a new responsibility, both frightening and liberating, but family remained the most difficult area. A nephew insisted on clarification. A brother-in-law made tasteless jokes during lunch. My sister, even trying to be understanding, still showed fear about what others would say. I took a deep breath with each comment, trying not to return to the old prison of silence. Michael always encouraged me. "You don't have to fight with everyone. Just don't fight with yourself." That phrase became my anchor. One night, sitting in the living room, I opened the old diary once more. The yellowed pages, the scribbles, Michael's name repeated dozens of times. But now that diary wasn't just a reminder of what I hadn't experienced, it was a symbol, a sign that somehow life was still offering me a second chance. I ran my hand over the cover and murmured, "There's still time." The encounters with Michael became more intense. There was no longer any way to pretend we were just reconnected friends. The glances were lingering, the touches more frequent, the silences thicker. But along with this came fear. It was no longer the youthful fear of being discovered in college. It was the fear of facing, at almost 70, the judgment of a lifetime from acquaintances and family. One afternoon, in the same cafe where we had our first conversation after our reunion, Michael looked at me intently and said, "You need to decide how long you're going to live in this middle ground. Either you embrace what you feel, or you'll lose again." I shivered. The cafe seemed too small, the walls too close. The sentence sounded like an ultimatum, but also like liberation. How many of you have experienced something like this, being faced with a choice that could change everything, but still feeling that fear weighs more heavily? If it has happened to you, write the word in the comments decision. Society's reactions were just the beginning. My greatest enemy continued to be myself. The look in the mirror, the sleepless nights, the racing heart. Reuniting with Michael didn't just bring back memories, it brought urgency, the urgency to finally choose. And it was exactly at this point that my story began to gain even more tension. Because it's one thing to confess in front of strangers, protected by a microphone and distance. It's another to maintain that confession in front of family, neighbors, and lifelong friends. I knew the storm was just beginning, and deep down, I also knew that I could no longer back down. The next morning seemed ordinary, but my heart no longer knew the meaning of routine. Each step inside the apartment echoed as if it were the first of a new life. The speech in the living room still reverberated, and the consequences continued to unfold. But more than the looks and comments from others, what had really changed was the way I saw myself in the mirror. For the first time, the reflection didn't seem like a stranger. It was me, whole, without the need for masks. Even so, the world did not adjust as quickly as my soul desired. In the days that followed, reactions came in waves, messages full of irony from colleagues who were never really close, whispers of neighbors in the hallways, family divided between curiosity, disapproval, and timid acceptance. But I no longer reacted with despair. There was a new calm within me, as if the decision I made in front of the microphone had opened up not only a space in the world, but also within myself. Michael was always there, in meetings, in walks, in silent conversations. There was something in his eyes that said, "I always knew you had that courage, you just needed to believe it." This silent support was the solid ground in the midst of the storm. But not everything was simple. At a family lunch, a nephew confronted me coldly. "So it's true? What you said in the salon, does that mean you've spent your whole life hiding it?" I took a deep breath. Before, I would have run away, I would have made excuses. But now, at almost 70 years old, there was no more room for escape. It's true. I spent my whole life hiding who I was, and I won't hide it anymore. The silence that followed was heavy. My sister lowered her eyes, a brother-in-law coughed to cover it, some relatives shifted uncomfortably, but I held his gaze. For the first time, it wasn't me who was uncomfortable. It was them. This inversion surprised me. Fear always made me believe that the world had the power to crush me. But when I faced the truth, I realized that the one who was really vulnerable wasn't me, but rather those who never had the courage to deal with something different. That evening I walked with Michael to the old town square. The wooden bench, worn and newly painted, was still there. We sat side by side as we had so many decades before, but this time nothing needed to be hidden. Hands touched naturally. The gesture that would previously have been forbidden now seemed inevitable. "Did you notice?" Michael said with a tight smile. "The world keeps spinning, it hasn't collapsed." I laughed, a short laugh but full of relief. And I wasted so much time believing I would collapse. The cold night wind brought a chill that didn't just come from the weather. It came from the realization that, even late, there was still room to live. Not the time of youth and discoveries, but the time of maturity, and late freedom. Every minute was now precious because it was unique, and I knew I couldn't waste any more. How many of you have felt this? Believing for years that it was impossible, and suddenly realizing there is still a chance. If it has happened to you, write the word in the comments freedom, because that's what my story is about. The courage to seek your own freedom, even if it takes a lifetime. Meetings with Michael became routine, but now without guilt, without disguise. We walked together in public, exchanged confidences without fear of who was listening, laughed out loud without worrying about the looks. For many, it was still a silent scandal. But to me, it was just life happening. There were losses, of course. Some friends have definitely drifted away. Some family members chose to pretend nothing had happened. But there were also unexpected gains. A former co-worker reached out to me to thank me, saying that my words in the salon gave him the strength to talk to his own son about his truth. And an elderly neighbor once saw me walking hand in hand with Michael and just smiled and said, "It's beautiful to see when love doesn't give in to time." These small gestures worked like balms, proof that the truth, although painful, can also open doors. But the greatest transformation wasn't in others, it was in me. I no longer needed to justify myself. I learned to respond only when necessary, and sometimes not even that. Life became lighter because I was no longer burdened with masks. One night, as I was returning home from dinner with Michael, I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. The aged face, the wrinkles, the white hair. But for the first time, the look was alive. I didn't see myself as someone defeated by time, but as someone who had finally found himself. I touched the glass and murmured, "I exist." This recognition was more powerful than any applause, more liberating than any compliment. It was the encounter with my own truth finally accepted. The following days brought new energy. I started painting again, something I had abandoned in my youth. I started attending cultural events, no longer as an observer, but as a participant. Michael accompanied me, and together we rediscovered the joy of the little things. Little by little, the loneliness that had accompanied me for decades was dissolving. The silent apartment was no longer a prison, but a place of rest, because now there was life pulsing out of him. Was there still fear? Yes. Were there still judgmental looks? That too. But compared to the weight of silence I've carried for decades, none of that had any power. The fear didn't go away. It just lost its power to control me. One afternoon, sitting with Michael on a park bench, I looked up at the orange sky and said, "I've wasted a lot of time, but I still have something. I have now, and now is worth more than all the years that have passed." Michael smiled and replied, "So let's live in the now." That sentence sounded like a silent pact. No promises, no guarantees, just a commitment to living authentically in the present. And maybe that's what really matters. It doesn't matter how much time has passed or how many years have been wasted. There is always room to choose the truth. There is always room to free the heart. If you got this far, write the word in the comments now, because now is all we really have. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in nearly 7 decades, I no longer had to hide. The silence, which was once a prison, was now a voice, and that voice said clearly, "Life is only worth living when it is truly lived."